when you stream a movie, or you flip on a light switch, or maybe finalize some massive corporate data transfer, there is this persistent illusion that it's all happening up in the cloud.
Right, yeah, up in the sky somewhere.
Exactly. We visualize this wireless, weightless, almost magical infrastructure floating above us in low Earth orbit.
I mean, the physical disconnect is just profound. We talk about the digital economy as if it has somehow transcended geography, completely ignoring the reality that our modern world is incredibly physical, and it is wet.
It is very wet. I mean, over 80% of all international trade moves by sea. But we aren't just talking about shipping containers full of, like, electronics or grain here.
No, not at all.
It's the internet itself. It's the regional electricity grids, the literal fabric of global communication. And it is all lying in the mud at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
And based on the sources we are looking at for this deep dive today, that mud is becoming a highly contested battleground.
It really is. So we are dissecting two incredibly detailed sources today to understand the fragility of this hidden infrastructure. We have Renina Palu's comprehensive 2025 doctoral dissertation on assessing national maritime supply chain resilience.
Right.
And we're looking at that alongside a freshly released November 2025 NATO news report, which details the push to secure critical undersea infrastructure, specifically focusing on the Mediterranean.
And bringing those two together, it gives us a terrifyingly clear picture of how vulnerable our global nervous system truly is. So let's start with that physical reality, because the timeline laid out in these texts, it reads like a slow-moving thriller.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we have moved so far past the days of, a careless fishing trawler snagging a fiber optic cable with its net by accident.
Right. The accidental stuff is yesterday's news.
Exactly. The sources document a rapidly escalating series of deliberate underwater disruptions. So we saw the Nord Stream pipeline explosions back in 2022.
Yeah.
Then the Baltic Connector damage in October 2023, and then those highly alarming cuts right around Christmas 2024 to the telecommunications and power cables.
Right, including the S-Link, too.
Yes, the S-Link 2 between Finland, Estonia, Germany, and Sweden. It's just constant.
And the evolution of the threat is the core issue here. The texts really highlight a transition from accidental damage to sophisticated hybrid warfare and targeted sabotage.
Right.
We are seeing a deeply complex threat landscape where infrastructure isn't just incidentally damaged anymore. It is the primary target. The source material specifically details the suspected involvement of Russian vessels and the proliferation of what they call shadow fleets.
And just to be clear to you listening, our goal here is to impartially report the economic and strategic realities presented in these sources, right? We are not endorsing a geopolitical side or anything.
Right, exactly. We're just looking at the facts on the ground or under the water, as it were.
Right. But the factual reality described in the research is that these physical networks are under immense pressure from actors deliberately masking their activities.
Yeah, and I want to focus on that masking process, actually, because the concept of a shadow fleet, it sounds like something out of a pirate movie.
It totally does.
But the mechanics are entirely modern. These aren't ships flying a skull and crossbones. They are commercial vessels using fraudulent practices to bypass sanctions or obscure their locations.
Like spoofing their trackers, right?
Exactly. They spoof their AIS, the automatic identification system transponders. So they broadcast false coordinates, or they just go dark entirely.
Wow. It's like the world's nervous system is just lying on the sidewalk waiting to be tripped over, and we have people walking around blindfolded carrying sledgehammers.
That is a perfect analogy.
I mean, okay, let's unpack this. If someone was trying to dynamite a terrestrial power plant, there would be perimeters, armed guards, immediate arrests. How is it that in 2025, our most vital infrastructure is seemingly this exposed? Someone can just hover over a major data artery and drop an anchor through it with zero immediate consequences.
Well, what's fascinating here is that you are hitting on the most massive blind spot in global governance.
Okay.
Because you would assume the oceans, especially near industrialized nations, are heavily policed, right? But international law simply hasn't caught up with modern hybrid warfare. The primary legal instrument we rely on is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLS.
Wait. If UNCLS is literally the law of the sea, how can it completely miss protecting the most important things actually in the sea? Are we operating in a maritime Wild West?
We kind of are, yeah. Because UNCLS was negotiated in the 1970s and finalized in 1982. It was built for a completely different era.
Oh, okay.
It was primarily concerned with navigational rights, piracy, and, who gets to fish or drill for oil where. The dissertation points out this glaring legal vacuum. UNCLOS lacks clear, explicit criminalization for modern acts of sabotage against underwater cables and pipelines.
That is insane.
And the jurisdictional friction is immense when we look at where these cables actually lie.
Right, we were talking about the exclusive economic zones, the ETZs.
Exactly. The EEZs present a massive legal gray area for security. A coastal state has absolute sovereignty over its territorial waters, which is usually up to 12 nautical miles from shore.
Okay.
But an EEZ extends up to 200 nautical miles. So in that zone, the coastal state has the sovereign right to the economic resources, the fish, the oil, the wind energy. But they do not have full jurisdictional security powers to police the waters the way they police their own land.
So it's like having a security camera on your front porch, but the local police tell you they cannot intervene or arrest anyone until the burglar is actually standing inside your living room.
Yes, exactly. You can watch a shadow fleet vessel loitering directly above the S-Link 2 cable in your EZ, acting suspiciously, going dark on AIS.
Wow.
And legally, your Navy's hands are tied.
Wow.
The legal framework effectively forces nations to rely on deterrence rather than prosecution, because you can't simply board and seize a foreign-flagged vessel in international waters or an EEZ just because it is loitering near a pipeline.
Right, you'd need proof.
Undeniable proof of crime that international law doesn't even explicitly define as a crime yet. And when dealing with masked shadow fleets operating in harsh marine environments, gathering that forensic proof before the vessel simply sails away, it's nearly impossible.
Okay, so since international law is effectively paralyzed right now, it makes sense that nations are just abandoning the courtroom and leaning heavily into defense tech.
Oh, heavily.
I mean, the response detailed in these reports is a massive, multi-domain military pivot. The November 2025 NATO report outlines this perfectly. The NATO CUI, the Critical Undersea Infrastructure Network, they met in Rome specifically to integrate civilian and military responses.
Right, because the legal deterrence failed.
Exactly.
Right.
So now they're actively deploying advanced sensing technologies. We're talking drone swarms across the Mediterranean to maintain constant surveillance over these networks. Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. We are literally deploying smart buoys and drone swarms to watch the ocean floor.
The urgency is just palpable in the text. Military alliances are basically attempting to plug a governance gap with surveillance technology. It's a Band-Aid.
Yep.
And we see this heavily in the Baltic Sea as well. The sources highlight the Baltic Sentry operation, which is a multi-domain military push launched specifically as a rapid response to those December 2024 cable cuts. It represents a massive shift from passive observation to active integrated monitoring.
And I am fascinated by the specific national innovations Palu's research highlights in response to this. Like Estonia, for instance, they are pushing the Seawolf project.
Yes, Seawolf is fascinating.
They aren't just relying on surface ships anymore. They are deploying smart buoy networks that use acoustic signatures to map the seabed and detect anomalies. So they are training systems to differentiate between the acoustic signature of, like, a passing whale, a commercial cargo ship, and an autonomous underwater vehicle trying to tap a cable.
Which is incredible tech.
Right. And meanwhile, Portugal is advancing the Dual Signs initiative, heavily investing in dual-use port infrastructure, so it serves both commercial logistics and military defense monitoring needs simultaneously.
The technological leap is impressive, definitely. But we have to view it critically because it's a prime example of how resilience requires both public and private sector cooperation. And honestly, military surveillance, smart buoys, drone swarms, they only protect the physical cables and pipelines.
Right.
If we want to genuinely evaluate maritime resilience, we have to recognize that the ocean is a deeply interconnected system. Protecting the fiber optic cable is totally irrelevant if a cyber attack simultaneously shuts down the port's operating system, or if an environmental disaster halts all shipping traffic.
Ah, okay. And this is where Rina Palu's research introduces the CIGET framework, right? CIGET.
Exactly.
So that stands for Connectivity, Infrastructure, Governance, Environmental Impact, and Sustainability, and Technologies.
You got it. The CIGET framework is designed specifically for national governments to move away from reactive crisis management. Because without a comprehensive framework, governments just play whack-a-mole with crises.
Right.
They isolate problems, they pour funding into upgrading physical port infrastructure, but entirely neglect the outdated digital technologies running the customs clearance. or they invest in new ships, but fail to update the governance policies regulating their emissions.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? How does breaking the ocean down into an acronym actually solve anything? Like, let's walk through a scenario to see how this actually functions. Rather than just listing these 5 pillars, how does CIGET map a cascading failure?
Okay, imagine a seemingly minor breakdown in governance. Let's say 2 neighboring countries fail to ratify a bilateral customs treaty on time.
Okay, happens all the time.
Right. That governance failure immediately impacts connectivity because cargo processing slows down. The slow processing creates a massive backlog of ships idling outside a port, which overwhelms the physical infrastructure.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The idling ships burn heavy fuel oil while waiting, leading to a localized ecological crisis, which hits the environmental impact pillar. And finally, the port attempts to clear the backlog by overriding their automated scheduling technologies, introducing vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit.
Wow.
CIGET allows policymakers to see the ocean not as a series of isolated problems, but as a singular dynamic system. Pulling one thread unravels the whole tapestry.
Applying that systems-level thinking to physical trade routes is where the geopolitical reality really sets in for me. The sources detail the immense logistical friction involved in rerouting global trade, specifically focusing on the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, or TATR. Because of the geopolitical landscape, there is a massive economic push to establish transit corridors from Asia to Europe that entirely bypass Russian territory. And again, just maintaining our neutral stance here, this is purely an economic and strategic factual reality described in the text.
Right. It's just what the markets and governments are doing. And evaluating the TITR through the CIGET framework reveals immense vulnerabilities, primarily in connectivity and governance.
Yeah, the infrastructure needs are crazy.
Because when you rely on traditional ocean freight, a ship loads in Shanghai and unloads in Rotterdam. It's one continuous journey. But the Trans-Caspian route requires crossing multiple national borders over land and an inland sea.
Right.
You have to load cargo onto a train in Kazakhstan, transport it to the Caspian Sea, unload it onto a ferry, ship it across the water to Azerbaijan, unload it back onto another train, and navigate differing railway gauges, literally different widths of train tracks as you move toward Europe.
It's like trying to reroute rush hour traffic in a major city. Except the roads are oceans, the detours require international treaties, and, oh, you also have to make sure the local ferry can still get groceries to a tiny island. Every single one of those transfer points is a massive friction point.
Oh, absolutely.
The differing train gauges alone require massive lifting infrastructure just to move containers from one chassis to another. And if the governance isn't perfectly harmonized, like if customs data doesn't flow seamlessly between Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, the physical infrastructure doesn't matter because the cargo will just rot on the docks.
Exactly. And the macro-level global corridors rely on the exact same resilience principles as the micro-level local routes. Paulu's research provides a brilliant contrast by applying the same analysis to the ferry lifelines servicing Estonian small islands like Runu and Kinu.
I love that part. The scale is completely different, but the vulnerability is identical.
Completely identical.
The research breaks down a 4-level service model for these tiny island communities: daily, scheduled, invitation only, and tourism. So during the summer months, the tourism level kicks in, demand explodes, the ferries run constantly, generating vital revenue.
Yeah.
But in the deep winter, when the Baltic Sea freezes and the tourists vanish, it drops to a scheduled or invitation-only service.
And maintaining that winter service is pure governance and infrastructure survival. It is not commercially profitable to run an ice-breaking ferry for a few dozen residents, but it is socially essential.
Right?
The government has to fund and mandate that connectivity, ensuring the physical vessels are capable of operating in severe ice conditions just to keep those remote communities stocked with food and medical supplies.
Wow.
So whether it's a massive multinational transit corridor crossing the Caspian Sea or a single ferry keeping an island alive through an Estonian winter, the core threat is the same: lack of redundancy. True resilience fundamentally requires a viable, tested backup plan when that primary node fails.
Okay, so the logistics of physically moving the cargo and securing the data cables are daunting enough. But the sources point to an overarching bottleneck that threatens the entire maritime system. The E in the CIGET framework environmental impact and sustainability.
Yes, the green dilemma.
We have to secure and reroute all of this infrastructure without choking the oceans to death in the process.
The maritime industry is facing an absolute existential reckoning regarding its environmental footprint right now, and the Baltic Sea serves as a prime case study in the text. It is one of the busiest, most densely trafficked maritime regions on the planet, and the compounding ecological damage is severe.
Right.
The research thoroughly documents the invisible pollution. So you have the continuous underwater noise from thousands of propellers disrupting marine mammal communication and navigation.
Which is awful.
Yeah. Then there is the chemical pollution from heavy metals constantly leaching into the water from the anti-fouling paints they use to keep barnacles off ship hulls.
And then there's the atmospheric pollution driving eutrophication. Because ships burning marine diesel release massive amounts of nitrogen oxides, or NUOx.
Yes, NUOx is a huge issue.
When those nitrogen compounds settle into the enclosed waters of the Baltic, they act as an aggressive fertilizer. They trigger massive explosive algae blooms. And when that algae dies and sinks, the bacteria decomposing it consume all the dissolved oxygen in the water, creating these sprawling toxic dead zones where marine life literally suffocates.
It's devastating. And the regulatory response to this environmental degradation is aggressively squeezing maritime operators. The International Maritime Organization and the European Union have implemented strict emissions trading systems and targets.
Right.
Paulu's research specifically highlights the RoPax ferries, the roll-off passenger ferries running the critical route between Helsinki and Tallinn.
Yeah.
These operators barely survived the catastrophic drop in passenger revenue during the COVID-19 pandemic. And immediately upon recovering, they face immense financial pressure to rapidly decarbonize their fleets to meet these new EU strictures.
It sounds like we are trapped. I mean, the obvious answer seems to be adopting green maritime technology, right?
Yeah.
But the research explores utilizing wave energy in the Baltic Sea to power maritime needs, and the limitations are staggering.
They really are.
We're hitting literal and bureaucratic walls. Physically, the severe winter ice cover in the Baltic threatens to crush or freeze floating wave energy converters. You also have incredibly dense shipping lanes that just cannot be diverted to make room for energy arrays.
And the bureaucratic and spatial limitations are equally challenging. The Baltic Sea has extensive Natura 2000 designated areas.
Remind us what those are.
That's a network of core breeding and resting sites for rare and threatened species across the EU. You cannot simply anchor heavy industrial energy equipment in these protected marine habitats.
Right, makes sense.
Furthermore, developers face a bizarre lack of open access data. Assessing the seabed for a wave energy project requires highly detailed bathymetric and environmental data, much of which is restricted or siloed, making preliminary planning financially unviable for many green tech startups.
So, looking at the pressure from all sides here, operators need to build more resilient, redundant fleets and ports to survive the geopolitical threats. But the environmental regulations are squeezing them tight, taxing their capital. And the promised green tech-like wave energy keeps running into literal ice walls and habitat protections. Are we essentially sacrificing our logistical resilience in the pursuit of environmental sustainability?
It is a common industry argument, but the CIGET framework fundamentally rejects that premise. This is exactly why environmental impact and technology are equal pillars alongside governance and infrastructure. You cannot decouple them.
Okay.
The temporary financial and operational friction caused by these emissions regulations is actually forcing the industry to adapt. We are seeing a forced acceleration in alternative fuels, optimized algorithmic routing, and more efficient hull designs. Long-term resilience is impossible without sustainability. You simply cannot maintain a secure, globally functioning maritime supply chain on an ecologically dead, oxygen-starved ocean.
Man, the scope of what these sources cover is monumental.
It really is.
We started at the muddy bottom of the ocean, looking at the physical vulnerabilities, data cables, and pipelines being targeted by dark shadow fleets, while international laws like UNCLOS prove entirely inadequate for modern hybrid warfare.
Yep.
Then we examined the massive high-tech military pivot by NATO and individual nations, deploying acoustic smart buoys and drone swarms to fill that legal void.
And then we zoomed out with the CIGET framework.
Right, seeing how policy, infrastructure, and technology must be managed as a single ecosystem to prevent cascading failures. Whether you're navigating the complex borders of the Trans-Caspian transport route or just keeping an Estonian island ferry running in December.
Exactly.
And finally, the absolute necessity of integrating severe environmental constraints into our definition of survival. But I am left pondering a bit of a paradox that seems heavily implied by the constant push for technological solutions in these texts.
Ooh, what's that?
Well, to fix the physical vulnerabilities, the legal loopholes, and the environmental inefficiencies, our solution is aggressive digitalization, right?
Hmm.
We are deploying smart buoy networks that map the seabed. We are using AI logistics to optimize routes around the Caspian Sea bottlenecks. We are launching drone swarms across the Mediterranean and integrating civilian and military data into massive centralized surveillance networks.
Basically, the maritime industry is attempting to build a fully monitored, hyper-efficient, smart ocean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But are we merely trading a physical vulnerability for a digital one? I mean, think about it. If the physical cables and pipelines were this easy to sabotage with a dragging anchor or a rogue shadow vessel, the stakes change entirely when the whole system goes online.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
What happens when the central digital nervous system governing this entire CIGET framework faces a coordinated state-sponsored cyber attack? If the software running the locks on our new high-tech ocean can be hacked from a continent away, all the smart buoys in the world won't save us.
That is a terrifying thought.
It really makes you wonder if our relentless drive to digitally monitor and optimize every drop of the ocean
Mm.
might actually leave us more exposed than we ever were before. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden systems that run your world.